So the first round would be to kind of like to lay the land, to basically understand what are the set of issues that we all are going through in terms of managing water. And then the second round would be followed by looking at what are the set of initiatives, what has been working, what has not been working, and how we could kind of like scale that up in our context. So I'd like to start with Madhukar Upadhya to basically kind of like set us the issues that we all are confronting with, especially when it comes to exploring water-related solutions.
When I started my career as a water person back in the 90s, it was mostly, I was fascinated by the discussions of the transboundary water sharing, conflicts between cities, conflict between states in India, even within Nepal, the issues between two different areas. So I was fascinated to learn about those things. And I really followed those. But at the end of the day, when I came to the villages to start working in the water sector, I found out it's a completely different world when it comes to the local level. And what that means is it's a question of survival for lots of people. At the same time, it's also a question of development at the local level. And when the water regime, which is particularly in our region, is not uniformly available throughout the year. During 3 months, you have too much of water. You don't know what to do with. And the rest of 9 months or 8 months, you really look for water and try to bring water from areas that are much, much far away from the areas you need to bring it in. Which actually scientists have always said, water is such an issue that you don't get in the quantity you need, at the place you need, with the quality you need. So it's always those three things actually have been problems. And ever since the development started, water has been at the top of the agenda. They're bringing water to the people. And there are also issues connected with, how women are suffering because the water is not available and they have to walk up and down in the hills. But also in the plains, water actually is not available close to the villages where they live. So these were the issues actually that haunted me and started to look at what are the issues there. Looking at the entire Himalaya, and also when we are talking about the Himalaya, we're talking about the region actually as a whole Ganga-Brahmaputra basin as well as Indus basin. If we look at all this, there are differences of the water regime between the Western Himalayas and the Eastern Himalayas. That's one thing. Because Western Himalayas are more dry areas, wheat-prone area, wheat-dominated areas, whereas when you go to the east, it's mostly rice-dominated areas, and the availability of water is much more higher in the eastern areas. Thus, we also look at the forest areas, which is much denser in the eastern areas. For example, Bhutan is so rich in forest resources, also including the eastern part of Nepal, whereas if you go to the west, it's less water. And also, looking at the sources, the monsoon actually brings less water in the west, whereas the winter rain, which is also very crucial, brings more water, more snow in the west. So these are the things we deal with. What that means to our managing water for development and other things is, how do you look at the too much water that actually creates problem in terms of erosion, floods, and the related issues with it. I was traveling from Delhi to somewhere in Rajasthan one time. I met an industrialist, and we were talking. He started to talk about how often he had to move his factory, which was a dyeing factory, which required 500,000 liters of water every day. So he was moving, and that was about 8 years ago. So I thought, okay, because of overdrafting of groundwater in the plains, which also is happening in Nepal, by the way, that people have to suffer. The industries, the agriculture, the domestic uses, they all suffer because the water level is going down and down and down. And our understanding of that, the reason why groundwater is depleting is mostly because of overdrafting, and without looking at how the nature is behaving in the same way that we understood before. And then when I came to the mountains, I started to see the springs disappearing from the mountains. And there were other reasons also explained for that. For example, the land use changes, the building of roads, or deforestation. All these kind of causes were explained by different quarters. But the bottom line is, in different places from east to west, the difference between east and west I explained before, the springs are disappearing all the places. And when we were discussing this with people in Calcutta a few years ago, I also heard that springs are in Bhutan also is disappearing. So it raises a bigger question for the scientists who are working in water resources to see what's happening to the entire hydrology of the mountains. And then on top of this now we have climate change. which has changed the entire scenario. And what that means is, 2017 was a heavily flooded year. We never had experienced such a big flood in one year, in one single year, which cost us, only the damage caused by the flood was 61 billion rupees worth of damages. It never had happened before. So we are confronting with that because of the changes in the precipitation pattern, which also means that you have less and less water in winter. I just want to relate this also to the previous session talking about energy. Here is this guy who is developing a project of 5 megawatt in one of the districts in the eastern Nepal. By the time he finished his study, he went back again, tried to check the level of water in winter. He did not find the amount of water he required to produce 5 megawatt. So he reduced his power generation capacity to 3 megawatt. And then he went back again after a year. The water was even lower than the previous year. Then he comes back to me, because I was working at the local water management projects. He comes back to me and says, Madhukar, can you ensure that I get enough water for 10 months where I can produce electricity, 2 megawatts of electricity at a break-even cost of production cost? And that's the first time I found out that the environmentalists like us who work in resource management and everything like that never had been posed by any challenge before that. We kept saying this is going to increase water yield, this is going to help your water sources, but commercially, if someone asks me, can you increase the water yield or maintain that water yield, I had no answer because I didn't know what to do at that time. So this is the scenario we are faced with. In a way, the too much, too little water, we know that monsoon has too much and the winter is too little. So how do you look at it? How do you see water being at the center of sustainable development? Again, if you look at the sustainable development goals, at least 5 of the goals are related with availability of water. Food security, hunger, poverty, gender issue, sustainable agricultural production, they're all related with. Very interestingly, because of probably one of these reasons, that we have started importing more and more food from other countries. We import rice worth 36 billion a year, which means 3 billion worth of rice every month. So what happened to our water resources? What happened to our food production? People say, okay, we have changed our food habit. That's fine. But we also import maize. Very interestingly, we also import millet, which is actually not considered a very good food, but we also import that now. So there is an entire change happening in the mountains because of availability of water. And this has actually resulted in a very sad story of displacement of people from the villages. We studied in 5 districts in the hills, and we found out that families, at least 15 to 20 families were leaving the villages every year. And that has continued in most of the areas. And in those places where water shortages have been experienced, the local representatives come to the government and ask the government to do something about it. And the policy addressing those issues is like, going deeper into the ground and drawing more water. So the question is, without answering the question of why the water that was there until a few decades ago or a few years ago, if you start digging deeper into the lower aquifer, we are creating even more problems for future, which is related with the food security, energy, and everything that is core of sustainable development. So I think I can stop there by just saying one more thing. A big change is occurring in the Himalayas when it comes to the water sector. And that big change we have very little idea about, because it's happening in the plains, it's happening in the mountains, also it's happening in places where the forests are very rich. So I think I'll stop that.
Yes, thank you. Now over to Anustha ji to share some of her recent experiences in terms of confronting some of these challenges around water management, mainly looking at it from a drinking water perspective, large-scale solutions as well as small-scale solutions, especially the issues that she's been grappling with, and how, as a researcher, are those issues kind of changing over time?
First of all, I would like to talk about the water management in the past. In the past, we used to have stone spouts, wells, and even river for the water supply. The people of the Kathmandu Valley used to depend on the spouts for drinking water supply. If you have noticed, like the delegates from other country, like there are a large number of stone spouts all over the Kathmandu Valley. And they are the very well-engineered structure that used to be the main source of water for the valley residents. But now what happened is that with rapid population rise, haphazard construction, and unplanned urbanization, this has led to the destruction of the spouts. So what really happened is because of this unplanned urbanization, the natural pathway of the water has been blocked, and even the impervious layer is preventing the infiltration of the water. And at the same time, the over-extraction of groundwater has also affected the supply of the spout water supply. If you move around this Spartan city, you will see around 40 to 50 spouts, and you will notice that only half of them are working properly. And even among them, most of them function during monsoon only. So, like Anustha has already said, that we are likely to face, or we are having the problem of climate change. Climate change means more stress on water. More stress on water means more burden on women, because they are the ones who are handling the water and household activities. And at the same time, I would also like to share this data shared from the website of Smart Pani. In Kathmandu, the water demand is about 360 million liter per day. The government has been able to meet the dry supply demand of 90 million liter per day, and the wet supply is about 140 million liter per day. And accordingly, per capita is also 34 liters per day. In addition to that, there is also a problem of pollution. There is like E. coli contamination, which is responsible for different diseases such as diarrhea and typhoid. And in the past, my mother used to swim across Bagmati River, and they used to drink water from Bagmati, but then now it is not possible because the river of the Bagmati is hugely polluted. In such case, Melamchi project could be one of the solutions, but it is also the project that has been fueled by anxiety. Like when we visited Melamchi around 2012 and 13, it's mostly the farmers and fisher community that were expressing the anxiety over their livelihood. They said that if huge amount of water is being diverted to Kathmandu, then what will happen to their livelihood? What will happen to their agriculture? So it is very important to address the local issues as well. And it is also the project that faced lots of controversies and padlocks and protests in the past, and even the World Bank had backed out. Now, these are the local and national issues. Like when we seek water solution, we also seek solution at transboundary level. But this transboundary scale solution is quite complex too, because it requires major negotiations, and so both parties have to negotiate a lot to come across the benefit, and it's seen that the stronger party often dominate the talk, and so benefits are not equitably shared. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Now over to Sabyasachi.
We at the Asian Confluence, I feel it incumbent to give a brief geography of where we come from. We are an Indian organization, but we are headquartered in the northeastern region of India. It consists of 8 states, and these 8 states share about 8,000 kilometers of borders with our immediate neighbors. And the region is interlaced with rivers which all originate in the Himalayas, somehow make their way through the plains and enter the Bay of Bengal. Sort of the picture that David Molden showed us. We are at the cusp of that. And it sort of incites me to recite to you a poem. I thought after lunch I'll give you a brief interlude which one of our members, actually, senior members of our think tank, wrote for an effort we do called the Nadi Festival. And I'll read it out to you. You and I, on two sides of the border, when we share a river, we share more than a border. We share the soil the river brings from one to the other. When we share a river, we share a culture. When we share a river, we share a stream of human history. When it is both yours and of the neighbor, let's listen to the river. You know, somewhere in the big geopolitics of connectivity and hydropower and inland waterways and all of that, have we stopped listening to the river? The river is telling us, I'm a byproduct of our groundwater, our forests, our overall watershed. The way we use a drop of water affects the river. What we put into the river, what flows down to the river, affects the ocean. Water is the biggest connector. It is the natural connector. So when we are talking about the geography of the Himalayas, and as a connector from the mountains to the ocean, we are talking about connecting the mountain economy to the riverine economy, to the blue economy, which is coming up. It's water which is our connector. But today, starting from the oceans to the rivers, to the mountains, we are talking about how do we manage the trash in the oceans and the rivers. So my submission at this wonderful forum is that people at large have to start seeing the big picture. What we do to our water. I come from the state of Shillong, Meghalaya. We have a place called Cherrapunji and Mawsynram, which has the highest rainfall in the world. Yet, there is drought. Many of the rivers are drying up. Somewhere, there is a disconnect. Ma'am was talking about the Bagmati, you know. Many of our temples reside just near a river. We worship the river, and at the same time, the river is not really clean. And it's the truth throughout the whole region, actually. So how can we, governments are working together. There are sub-regional platforms. Businesses are also working together, but businesses are driven by commercial instincts and rightly so. But there is a third space beyond this first space of government and second space of business, which has to be nurtured, I feel, which is the third space of people. Peoples and ideas. How can individuals and organizations and entrepreneurs and activists and along with government and business come together to imbibe the spirit of this caring and sharing for our water? I think this is the need of the hour, something that was spelled out very rightly so by the Swiss ambassador yesterday, that we need political solutions to political problems. We are a region which is connected naturally by water, by the rivers, but we are divided politically. And the solutions, if it has to come up, people have to understand this inherent connect. So at the Asian Confluence, we have been trying to foster various kinds of dialogues and exchanges. We have something called the Nadi Festival, which celebrates the rivers coming from the Himalayas onto the sea. We tried 2 editions of it as a case of cooperation between India and Bangladesh, 2 main riparian partners. And I think it was a very, very successful exercise of bringing civil society, bringing together different players from different aspects of society coming together to create a common ground for how governments and businesses can also act on our river systems.
Over to Dr. Philip.
Now, a reductionist approach is necessary for scientific progress. But we must never lose sight of the holistic point of view. When we look at water, we're reminded of water as being one of the elixir of life. A more acute element will be oxygen, and a less acute will be perhaps nutrition. As far as water is concerned, the most common water that I see around this region, covering Nepal, India, and neighboring countries, are water that has been processed. Reverse osmosis water, distilled water, they are not the same as what you get from the spring water of the Himalayas. Take the bottled water that we have frequently. These bottled water are not a mineral water. If you look at the label, it says processed drinking water. They are so highly processed that it's considered dead water. And how do you actually relate to that as being dead water? First of all, if you were actually to drop a pH tester in there, you find that the water that is in front of you, which is processed, over-processed, if I may add, are actually acidic in nature. Now, if I were to present you with an offer and said, I'll drink this water, which is acidic, every day, I doubt if any of you would agree to that. But the fact remains that that is what is happening, where most of us are not aware of what's really there. Some of you may not be even drinking bottled water. You'll be looking at tap water. Tap water has its own issues. They're not as clean as they seem to be. The amount of contaminants naturally occurring and also that has been added to tap water or municipal water in order to make it look clean, like flocculators, like pH balancing agents. They'll add more contaminants to us at the expense of our wellness. Bottled water has its own other issues, apart from the environmental impact. You look at plasticizers that are leached into the water, impacting further on our human wellness, on our internal environment. In India, I find that there are a lot of bore well water still being consumed with high total dissolved solids, high TDS water, which has its own issues. Now, these are all water that cannot be compared to the spring waters of Himalaya or some of the other more well-known healing waters of the world. Perhaps the Zamzam water in Saudi Arabia, perhaps the waters in Ludes, and so on and forth. But what can we do about this? At the end of the day, whatever initiatives we're trying to do here depends on two things. First, if we are not well, we will not have the energy and the passion to do any of these things. And secondly is that in all these initiatives, there must be the element of funding. A lot of the initiatives we've been talking about are based on charitable funding. Some goes beyond that. For any initiative to be fully sustainable in the long run, it needs to be self-funding in some ways. Mr. Moderator, can I continue to the solution and work our way back this time round? Okay. Now I'm going to present with you my thoughts about what we can do about some of the issues that I've highlighted. As I said earlier, these initiatives that we're all trying to do requires funding, and where do they come from? What about if there are ways that I mean, earlier this morning, there was a contribution by, I think it's Mr. Shujit Acharya, that Nepal is the biggest exporter is manpower. Now, that's a fact that's not going to change tomorrow or next year. How can we harness this? How can we harness this situation? Now, instead of exporting manpower that exchanges time for money, what about empowering them to do something more? Turning them into business network builders that would actually generate revenue for the country and themselves. It would generate the same or even more revenue for the country without that much effort into the whole process. At this juncture, I would like to share my appreciation with Carol Wolfson, who is one of the founding members of the Himalayan Consensus. She has very kindly donated an ionized water system to the Shambhala Cafe, which is owned by, I believe, the Himalayan Consensus, where it also comes with a franchise to generate income for the Himalayan Consensus or the cafe. So in effect, we're looking at a single donation that is donating a fishing net rather than a truckload of fish. And that can be a very sustainable approach to such initiatives. What I'm talking about here is water that is not over-processed to the extent that is dead water. Now, how do you know that it's dead water? A very simple illustration I'll just describe here. I don't have that many minutes. I think many of us in school days would have done an experiment where you put two probes into a potato and you connect to a torchlight bulb and it lights up. The potato is alive. If you were to cook the potato, then the light bulb no longer turns on. It's dead. If you do the same thing with this water here, you find that it is also dead. There's no electrical charge in it. Ionized water provides you with that electrical charge as antioxidant potential. And antioxidants, as we all know, determines whether we are alive or not. So ionized water solutions for our internal wellness is very essential. It is not just, it goes beyond just clean water. It is live water. I am not going to go into the details of how this could be a self-sustaining in terms of generating funds. But I will be available for discussions if there is an interest from any party at the end of this session. I think what I would do is I see that the clock is ticking away. I'm not going to take more time, but pass the microphone on to Mr. Dutta,
Yep.
so that you can carry on with the second part of your...
So let's spin another round, like again, come this words, trying to map out what are the initiatives around addressing some of these complex challenges that we are facing. So initiatives as we're involved, some of those examples which could be scaled up, which could be kind of perhaps shared within larger forums like this, exchange of knowledge, exchange of ideas that could be kind of replicated in similar contexts.
Yeah. Well, sure, I can just share some of the initiatives that we are doing. First of all, we have a similar effort which is called the Nadi, means the river, and we call it the annual River Festival. And we've been growing this for the last 2 years. You'll be happy to know that it is a civil society-driven platform. This is the first year we are also collaborating with the Himalayan Consensus Summit, so that's why our logo is there. And we do plan to take connect more such initiatives. More of these things should happen. And we can play the role of a matchmaker between bringing together businesses, civil society, and government stakeholders together, I think, and create an enabling environment for that. So that's something we've been doing. The other thing is that the younger researchers and academia who influence younger minds, the very important and technical research at the highest level, cutting edge research, has to percolate down to the younger minds, the younger academics. And this is an area through something that we do called the Young Scholars Forum. We do it as an ongoing basis. We've been trying to percolate the big picture to the micro picture, sort of connect the micro and the macro, and have a feedback between the macro view and the micro view, which right now seems to be some disconnect there. And thirdly, I think amongst all of us, I think in this room and beyond, I think we can play the role of, sharing and bringing in sharing of best practices. As there are tensions, the media often highlights the negative too much. But I think there is ample scope for us to highlight the positives. Say, there are information sharing between civil society organizations between India and Nepal on floods. There are wonderful initiatives going on, How can we highlight these in the media? There are wonderful things going on between India and Bangladesh. How can we highlight these? How can the good models of, Bhutan or Bangladesh or Nepal and India be shared amongst the stakeholders? So I think that is the need of the hour, and that's something that at the Asian Confluence we've been making an effort to do that. And I welcome all your ideas and participation and our involvement in similar efforts that people in this room do and beyond. So I think we'll leave it at that.
Now over to Anustha ji on initiatives that could be of relevance to similar settings outside of Kathmandu, the learnings, the lessons that we've learned from Kathmandu, what to do and what not to do in terms of managing water.
I would like to talk about the short-term and long-term solution. The immediate solution could be preventing wastage. Like in Kathmandu, you can see two types of people. The one group, very affluent group, they even use the pipe water to wash their car. And there is another marginalized poor community who stand in line for a long time just to get a bucket of water. So what I mean to say is, if we prevent the wastage and supply the water to this marginalized community, we may solve their problem to a certain extent. And another is that maybe we can promote the recyclable water. Rainwater harvesting could be an option, but Suman sir is here. Maybe in later part of the discussion, he can light more on rainwater harvesting. But what I think is that for this working class people, the rainwater harvesting may not be very highly affordable, so it should be more cost effective and affordable. In Madan Pokhrel, Palpa, people have practiced this plastic pond to supply water for their vegetable gardens. So plastic pond could also be an option. Now, talking about the long-term solution, in Kathmandu, what is really practiced is that we directly dump the waste into the rivers. So treating the wastewater before they are passed into the river could be an option for the sustainability of the river water supply. And it is very important that we should ensure that the water that is provided to people should be of very good quality and sufficient quantity, and it should be accessible to all as well. It's true that we need to seek solution from local to state to transboundary level, but while seeking the solution, the technical solution may not be locally accepted. So we should seek the type of solution that is locally acceptable. And even if there is dispute, it's very important that the dispute should be managed and this entire water project should be transparent and inclusive as well. Thank you.
Yeah, water does play a role of a connector since immortal times. We've seen, again, the upstream area has been connected to the downstream, the mountains to the plains. But it's not only the taken for granted connectivity, but also while providing solutions for water management, there are ways to also look at enhancing connectivity as well. Mr. Upadhya has been kind of long working on one of those solutions, especially in the southern hills of Kathmandu Valley, where he's been able to connect some of those connectivity-related technological options in terms of providing better water services. I'd like to kind of request him to delve on some of his ways of providing solutions for not only providing water management solutions, but also looking at increasing connectivity for people and goods and services. But this and other initiatives, a short one, I could see that time is running out, and then we'd open up for questions.
Thank you, Anil. We have already heard about the water tower. The Himalayas is the water tower, and the snow deposits actually feeds the rivers. In 2009, when we were talking about this, we had a big workshop before we went to COP15. It was from Kathmandu to Copenhagen. And we just discussed about climate impacts on the water resources. And one question that was asked at that meeting was, how much water does the snow really contribute to the flows, the annual flows? And there was no answer. There were differences between the east and the western Himalayas, but somehow people had kind of figured out it's between 4 to 20%. What that means is 80% or even more than that actually comes from the mountains, the hills. And we talked about what's happening in the hills. It's all drying out. It's not only drying out in terms of water resources, but also in terms of vegetation. Most of the hills now are covered with vegetation that grow in the dry areas. So it's a very ecologically, kind of visible things that's happening. So to fulfill that water which is drying out, people in the mountains have to start working on. And that is, people talk about water harvesting or making ponds, recharge ponds. There are initiatives like that being done in the hills also. But why should they do if there are options like going back to the village, the urban areas or the plains and do something else? So they will not be doing that until there are incentives for people to harvest water in the mountains. That means with the water harvested in the mountains, they have to be compensated. And there are two ways to do it. One, with the water they conserve, they can start producing more, like vegetables and stuff that can be transported to the urban areas. But in the mountains, transportation is the biggest problem, because even if you say we have connected with the roads, hardly few villages are connected, but the rest of the villages still need to walk to the roads. So transporting materials like the tomatoes, milk is still a problem. To address that, what we did was, we started to connect the roads with the villages with small ropeways to haul products. Interestingly, that ropeway can be operated by the electricity produced at the local level. So it's a self-sustained kind of transport mechanism that can be introduced to help the people who conserve water in the mountains for their benefit. The second thing we can also look at, which we are talking about but haven't done so well, is looking at the payment for environmental services. The water they produce, they conserve, will be used by people in the downstream, and you can start paying them. So I think these two are the things that we can talk about.
Yes, thank you.